Lesson 12-2, the Pythagorean Theorem. The main idea of this lesson is to find the length using the Pythagorean Theorem. So before we begin doing any examples, we probably should review what the Pythagorean Theorem is. Basically, it says in a right triangle, the square of the length of the hypotenuse equals the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs. So here's a few important points about the Pythagorean Theorem. First off, it only applies to right triangles. So this right here is a right triangle, and we know it's a right triangle because it has one right angle. The side directly across from the right angle is known as the hypotenuse. And the hypotenuse of a triangle is the longest side. So whenever you look at a right triangle, the side that's diagonally and directly across from the right angle is known as the hypotenuse, and this is always going to be the longest side of a triangle, of the right triangle. The other two sides of the triangle are known as legs. So this right here is a leg, and this right here is the leg. The sides that are right next to or touch the right angle, so this side right here and this side right here, these are known as the legs. So the sides next to the right angle are known as the legs, and the side directly across from the right angle is known as the hypotenuse. So what the rest of the Pythagorean theorem says, it says the square of the length of the hypotenuse. So one way that we can write hypotenuse is we use the letter C to represent hypotenuse. And it says the square, so that means we're going to square it. And it says that it's equal, so I'm going to write an equal sign. And then it says the sum of the squares of the lengths of the legs. So that means if you take each one of these legs and square them and add them together, you're going to get the square of the length of the hypotenuse. And the way that the variables that we use for the legs are A and B. And there we have the Pythagorean theorem written out as an equation. It's c squared is equal to a squared plus b squared. The hypotenuse is the c, and then either one of these legs, it doesn't matter which one, they're known as a and b. So we're going to use this formula, c squared equals a squared plus b squared, in order to solve for the length of a leg or a hypotenuse. So here's our first question. It says find the length of the hypotenuse of the triangle. So in other words, we want to find this length over here. C is the thing that we don't know. This is the side that we need to solve for. So I always encourage my students to start by writing the Pythagorean theorem down, and then substitute the information that we know from here into the formula over here. We don't know the length of c, so that means I'm going to keep that variable, c squared is equal to, now remember I told you the lengths of the legs, it doesn't matter which one we call a and which one we call b. So I'm going to call this one down here a and this one over here b, but you could call this one over here a and this one over here b if you wanted to. So for a squared, I'm going to put in 4, and I'm going to square that, and I'm going to add that to the length of b, which is 8. So now I'm just going to do the math. C squared equals 4 squared, that means 4 times itself, so that's 16, plus 8 squared, which is 8 times itself, which is 64. Now we just need to know what's 16 plus 64. And we can get out our calculator. 16 plus 64 is equal to 80. So that means c squared equals 80. But remember, we don't want to know what c squared is. We want to know how long is this hypotenuse. So to unsquare things, you have to find their square root. So in other words, you're trying to find what number times itself gets you 80. So we're going to go to our calculator. We have 80 into our calculator here. And this button right here is the square root button. So in other words, this is the button that we use to find the square root of 80. So I'm just going to push this. and I get 8.944, and it seems to go on and on. So I'm going to round to the nearest tenth, and I'm going to say that this is 8.9. So that means C is equal to 8.9 feet. And we can check to make sure we did our math. Remember, I told you that the hypotenuse is always the longest side. And I can look at my answer here, 8.9 feet. And 8.9 feet is definitely longer than these two sides, so that means my answer must be correct. And so that's how you solve if you want to solve for the hypotenuse. Sometimes, though, we're given the length of the hypotenuse. In this example says, find the missing measure of the triangle and round to the nearest tenth if necessary. So instead of the hypotenuse being missing here, the length of one of the legs is missing. So this is C up here. I'm going to call this B over here, and this is A down here. So remember, we're going to start by writing the formula down first. C squared equals A squared plus B squared. And now we're going to substitute the information from the picture into the equation. So for C squared, we know that C is equal to 13 squared is equal to A squared plus, and from the picture we know that B is 5 squared. So in case you don't know what 13 squared is, I'll show you how to do it on your calculator. You put in 13, and then you push this button right over here, x to the second power. Or you can just go times 13. And 13 squared is 169 is equal to A squared plus 5 squared, 5 times itself, is 25. Now we have to get A, so it's all by itself, and we do that by doing the opposite of adding 25, which is to subtract 25. Adding 25 and subtracting 25 cancel out, so you're left with A squared over on this side. 9 minus 5 is 4. 6 minus 2 is 4. 1 minus nothing is 1. I'm going to put my equal sign between here. But remember, we don't want to know what A squared is. We want to know what A equals. So to unsquare something, you find its square root. And I'm going to go to my calculator. And 144, remember we're going to push this button right here, the square root button. The square root of 144 is 12. So that means the length of A is equal to 12 centimeters. And that seems to make sense because the length of that leg is less than the hypotenuse. So that means this could be the length right here, 12 centimeters. So that's how you use the Pythagorean theorem. Remember that it's C squared equals A squared plus B squared. C is the hypotenuse, which is directly across from the right angle. A and B are the legs, which are right next to the right angle, and it doesn't matter which one you call A and which one you call B. You take the information that's given to you in the problem or the picture and you substitute it into the equation and you solve. And when you get down to the end, in order to unsquare something, you have to find its square root.